Lisa Martinez straightened her blue diplomatic uniform as she walked through the massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers. The ceiling stretched so high above her that she could barely see it through the swirling mists that the Veiltar delegates preferred. Around the circular room, representatives from dozens of species sat in sections designed for their unique needs. The hive, collective delegates buzzed and clicked in their corner, their insect-like bodies moving in perfect coordination. The crystalline resonance beings hummed soft, musical notes that translated into words through the universal communicators everyone wore. Ambassador Martinez took her seat in the small human section, which looked tiny compared to the grand platforms of the older galactic civilizations. The next item on our agenda concerns the exploration rights in Sector 779, announced Chancellor Valfara, a tall Veiltor whose translucent body shimmered like smoke. The humans have submitted a request to establish a research station in that region. Several delegates made sounds that the translators converted into laughter. Ambassador Martinez had heard it all before. To most of the galaxy, humans were the new kids who tried too hard. They had only been part of the Galactic Council for 50 years, which was barely a moment compared to the 1,000-year memberships of other species. Humans always want to explore the dangerous places, buzzed High Voice 772. They seem to think they can survive anything. Perhaps it is their youth, sang Crystal Song Harmonic 9. They have not learned proper caution yet. Ambassador Martinez stood up slowly. She had learned not to react quickly in these meetings. Quick movements made the other species nervous, as if humans might suddenly do something unpredictable, which, she had to admit, they probably would. Honored delegates, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation system. Humanity requests these exploration rights because we believe the region may contain archaeological sites of great importance. Our scientists have detected unusual energy patterns that suggest ancient civilizations once lived there. Ancient civilizations, repeated Chancellor Valfara. How fascinating. Though perhaps the humans hope to find more stories about their own people's great deeds. More translator-filtered laughter filled the chamber. Ambassador Martinez smiled politely. The other species loved to tell stories about human accomplishments, but they always made them sound like tall tales. Humans surviving impossible disasters. Humans refusing to surrender when any reasonable species would. Humans somehow finding solutions to problems that should have no answers. To the galactic community. These were entertaining myths about a stubborn young species that had somehow lucked their way to the stars, far from the council chambers. Commander Jake Williams stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Pioneer's Edge as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel. Through the main viewing screen, he could see the dead world they had come to investigate. The planet's surface was covered in the twisted remains of cities that had been abandoned for thousands of years. Atmospheric analysis complete, Commander, reported Lieutenant Bobby Chun from the science station. The air is breathable, but there are strange energy readings coming from the largest city ruins. Commander Williams nodded. Take us down, pilot. Standard landing protocol. The ship descended through the thin atmosphere and settled on a flat area near the ruined city. Within an hour, an exploration team was walking through streets that had been empty for millennia. The buildings were made from materials that human scientists had never seen before, yet they seemed familiar somehow. Commander, you need to see this, called Dr. Amanda Foster from deeper in the ruins. She was the team's xenorchaeologist, an expert in studying alien civilizations. When the commander reached her location, she was standing in front of a wall covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. What am I looking at, Doctor? He asked. I'm not entirely sure, Dr. Foster replied, running her scanner over the symbols. But these markings, they're not like anything in our databases. Yet when I look at them, I almost feel like I should understand them. Commander Williams stepped closer to the wall. The symbols did seem strangely familiar, like words he had. Once known but forgotten. Can you translate any of it? Bits and pieces, Dr. Foster said, her voice excited. This section here mentions something called the Endless War, and this part talks about those who refuse to fall. But Commander, here's the really strange part. She pointed to a section of symbols near the bottom of the wall. These symbols, HERE, they're not describing the beings who built this place. They're describing someone else. Someone who fought alongside them in this war. Who? Dr. Foster looked up at him with confused eyes. U.S. Commander. They're describing humans. Back on the ship, the Discovery team worked through the night to catalog their findings. The wall was just the beginning. Hidden beneath the ruined city, they found a massive chamber filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with their own light. In the center of the chamber sat an object that defied easy description. It was roughly spherical, about the size of a person, and made from the same shifting material as the symbols on the wall. When Dr. Foster approached it with her scanning equipment, the object began to glow brighter. Energy levels are increasing, reported Lieutenant Chun from his portable scanner station. Whatever this thing is, it's responding to our presence. Responding how? Commander Williams asked. Before Lieutenant Chun could answer, the object suddenly blazed with brilliant light. Lines of energy raced across its surface, forming patterns that looked almost like star maps. The chamber filled with a low humming sound that seemed to resonate in everyone's bones. It's activated something, Dr. Foster said, staring at her readings. Commander, this thing just sent a signal. A very powerful signal. Where? Based on the directional array. Deep space, beyond our current star charts. Commander Williams felt a chill run down his spine. How far beyond? At least 50,000 light years, maybe more. The signal raced through space faster than any technology the galaxy knew about. It passed sleeping worlds and empty systems, traveling through regions where no living thing had ventured in millions of years. Finally, it reached its destination, a structure so massive that planets would look like pebbles beside it. The structure had floated in the cosmic void for so long that cosmic dust had begun to accumulate on its surface. Inside its vast chambers, things that had slept for eons began to stir. Ancient minds awakened to thoughts of hunger and memory. They remembered a war fought across galaxies. They remembered an enemy that had somehow, impossibly, driven them back. They remembered humans in the council chambers on Nexus Prime. Ambassador Martinez was finishing her presentation about exploration rights when her personal communicator chimed with an urgent message. She glanced down at the device and felt her blood turn cold. I apologize, honored delegates, she said, standing quickly. I must return to human space immediately. There has been a discovery. As she hurried from the chamber, she could hear the other delegates discussing among themselves. Some wondered if the humans had found another one of their legendary artifacts. Others suggested that perhaps the young species had finally bitten off more than they could chew. None of them realized that across the galaxy, the legends they had dismissed as human exaggeration were about to become very, very real. Captain Rick Thompson was drinking his morning coffee when the universe decided to break the laws of physics. He had been patrolling the outer edge of human space in his ship, the Defender, when his sensors picked up something impossible. Captain, called Ensign Mary Davis from the sensor station, her voice shaking. You need to see this. There's something out there, but my readings don't make sense. Captain Thompson set down his coffee and walked over to look at her screen. The display showed empty space, but the energy readings suggested something massive. Was there? Something bigger than a space station, bigger than anything humans had ever built. Run a full diagnostic on the sensors, he ordered. Maybe we have a malfunction. Already did that twice, sir. The sensors are working fine. There's definitely something out there, but it's like it exists and doesn't exist at the same time. Before Captain Thompson could respond, the empty space in front of them began to change. Reality seemed to twist and bend, and suddenly there was a ship where nothing had been before. The vessel was enormous, its surface covered in patterns that hurt to look at directly. It didn't reflect light like normal matter. Instead, it seemed to absorb everything around it. "Communications. Try to contact them," Captain Thompson ordered. "No. Response, sir. In fact, I'm not even sure they're made of normal matter." The alien ship turned toward them, though it didn't seem to move in any way they could understand. Captain Thompson felt his skin crawl as he realized they were being studied by something that shouldn't exist. "All stations, prepare for evasive maneuvers," he commanded. "I don't like the feel of this." The alien ship did something that would haunt Captain Thompson's dreams for the rest of his life. It reached out with invisible force toward a nearby planet, a small world that housed a Veilter research colony. But instead of attacking the planet, the ship simply made it stop existing. One moment, the planet was there on their sensors, home to 3 million Veilter scientists. The next moment, there was nothing. Not debris, not an explosion, not even empty space where the planet had been. It was as if the planet had never existed at all. "What just happened?" whispered Ensign Davis. "Captain." Thompson stared at the empty space where an entire world had been seconds before. His computer systems showed no record of any planet ever being in that location. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he would never have known it was there. "Get us out of here," he said quietly. "Maximum speed, now." As the Defender raced away from the impossible ship, Captain Thompson tried to call the Veilter research station to warn them about what he had seen. But when he contacted Veilter High Command, they had no idea what he was talking about. According to their records, there had never been a research station in that sector. The only proof that 3 million people had ever lived was in Captain Thompson's memory and the memories of his crew. On the research ship Pioneer's Edge, Dr. Amanda Foster was having the worst week of her scientific career. The artifact they had found was sending out signals constantly now, and each signal seemed to trigger responses from deep space. Worse, the translations she was making from the ancient symbols were telling her things she didn't want to believe. "Commander Williams," she called as she worked in the ship's main laboratory. "I need to show you something, and you're not going to like it." Commander Williams looked up from the reports he was reading. "Is it worse than the news I'm getting from Fleet Command? Because apparently entire planets are disappearing across the galaxy." "Much worse," Dr. Foster said. She activated a holographic display that showed the translated text from the ruins. "I've been working on these symbols for 3 days straight. I can read most of them now, and they're telling us the history of something called the Endless War." The holographic text floated in the air between them, glowing softly in the dim laboratory light. Commander Williams read the words slowly, and with each line, his face grew paler. "According to this," Dr. Foster continued, "there was once a species that could erase things from existence. Not destroy them, not kill them, but make them never have existed in the first place. They were called the Devourers, and they spread across multiple galaxies, consuming entire civilizations by removing them from reality." "That's impossible," Commander Williams said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Because I'm reading reports about planets that are disappearing without any trace they ever existed. The only beings who remember them are the ones who witnessed the disappearance directly." Commander Williams sat down heavily in a nearby chair. "Keep reading, Doctor. What else does it say?" "The war lasted for millions of years. Entire species joined together to fight the Devourers, but nothing worked. Conventional weapons couldn't. Hurt beings that existed partially outside of normal reality. Energy weapons passed right through them. Even when the allied species managed to destroy Devourer ships, the Devourers would simply make those victories never have happened. Dr. Foster paused and looked at Commander Williams with frightened eyes. But then something changed. A new species joined the war. A species that somehow could fight the Devourers effectively. A species that refused to accept that their defeats were permanent, even when the Devourers tried to erase them from history. "Let me guess," Commander Williams said. "Humans. The descriptions match us perfectly. The texts call them the stubborn. Ones and those who remember, despite forgetting. They were the only species that could maintain their existence, even when the Devourers tried to erase them. More importantly, they were the only ones who could remember the people and places that the Devourers had consumed." Commander Williams stood up and began pacing around the laboratory. "So you're telling me that humans fought these things before?" "Not just fought them. Won against them." The texts describe how the humans developed weapons and tactics that could actually hurt the Devourers. They learned to anchor reality around themselves, making it impossible for the Devourers to erase them. Or their allies. What happened to them, these ancient humans? Dr. Foster pulled up another section of text. That's where it gets strange. The war ended, but the humans didn't just go home. They scattered across the universe, seeding worlds with their descendants. The texts say they were preparing for the day when the Devourers would return. Before Commander Williams could respond, his communicator chimed with an urgent message from Fleet Command. As he read it, his face went white. "Doctor, we need to get this information to Earth immediately. According to this report, the disappearances are spreading. But there's something else. The attacks are failing in human space. Colonies that should be impossible to defend are holding their ground." Dr. Foster felt a chill run down her spine. "Commander, I think the Devourers have returned. And I think our ancestors left us the tools we need to fight them." "What kind of tools?" "Not weapons or technology. Something more basic." The texts describe human traits that sound like personality flaws. Stubbornness, refusal to accept defeat, the ability to hope when hope is illogical. But these weren't flaws. They were evolutionary adaptations developed specifically for fighting enemies that could erase you from existence. Commander Williams was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was grim. "Doctor, are you saying that everything that makes us human was designed for war?" "Not designed, evolved, shaped by millions of years of fighting an enemy that could make you never have existed. We're not just descendants of warriors, Commander. We're descendants of the only warriors who ever successfully fought beings that could rewrite reality itself." As if in response to her words, the artifact in the ship's cargo bay pulsed with brighter light. Across the galaxy, more signals raced through space toward ancient structures that had been sleeping in the cosmic void. In those structures, more minds awakened to thoughts of hunger and revenge. The Devourers remembered the species that had driven them into hiding eons ago. They remembered the stubborn creatures that refused to stay erased, no matter how many times reality was rewritten. They remembered humans. And now they were coming back to finish the war that had never really ended. Dr. Foster looked at her readings and realized that the signal strength was increasing. More artifacts were activating across the galaxy, and each one was calling to something in the darkness between stars. "Commander," she said quietly, "I think we're about to find out just how much of our legends are actually memories." Colonel Steve Baker had seen many battles in his 20 years of military service, but he had never seen anything like what was happening to New Geneva Colony. Through his binoculars, he watched as reality itself seemed to bend and twist around. The attacking Devourer ships. The enemy vessels moved without following any laws of physics, he understood, appearing and disappearing as they pleased. "Sir, we've lost contact with the Eastern Defense Grid," reported Sergeant Nina Wells, her voice crackling through the radio. The entire installation just stopped being there. Colonel Baker lowered his binoculars and looked at the tactical display in the command bunker. Red marks showed where defensive positions had been moments before. Now those same locations showed empty ground on the sensors, as if nothing had ever been built there. "How many men did we lose?" he asked. "That's the problem, sir. According to our records, we never had any defensive positions in those areas. The only reason I remember them is because I was talking to Corporal Jim Adams on the radio when his position disappeared." Colonel Baker felt that familiar chill that every human was learning to recognize. The Devourers didn't just destroy their targets. They made them never have existed in the first place. The only humans who remembered the erased soldiers were the ones who had direct contact with them at the moment of disappearance. "All units, fall back to secondary positions," he ordered into his radio. "And remember, stay in radio contact with each other. If someone disappears, you might be the only proof they ever lived." Despite being outnumbered and outgunned by enemies that could rewrite reality, the human defenders of New Geneva were doing something impossible. They were winning. Every time the Devourers tried to erase a human position, the humans would somehow remember where it had been and rebuild it. When the Devourers erased human soldiers, other humans would remember their names and continue fighting in their honor. It was as if the human ability to be stubborn extended to their very existence. "Colonel," called Lieutenant Abby Martinez from the communications station, "I'm getting reports from all over human space. The colonies that should have fallen in the first wave are still fighting. Some of them are even pushing the attackers back." Colonel Baker allowed himself a small smile. "Any word from the alien worlds?" "That's the bad news, sir. We're getting refugee ships from 17 different species. Entire worlds are just gone. The Veil Tarhum world disappeared 3 hours ago. 5 billion people just erased from history." The smile faded from Colonel Baker's face. "Do we have any record of their culture, their history?" "Only what's stored in human databases, sir. We traded cultural information with them 50 years ago as part of a diplomatic exchange. We might be the only ones in the galaxy who remember that the Veilter ever existed." While the battle raged on New Geneva, engineer Maya Johnson was working frantically in her laboratory aboard the space station Unity. She had been studying the energy patterns from Devourer attacks for the past week, trying to understand how beings could manipulate reality itself. "Computer, run simulation 47, she said. Wiping sweat from her forehead. The holographic display showed her latest theoretical weapon design. It was based on principles that seemed to violate everything she had learned in engineering school, but somehow felt right to her human intuition. "Simulation complete," the computer announced. "Theoretical effectiveness against reality manipulation fields, 67%. Maya stared at the results. It wasn't perfect, but it was the first weapon design that showed any possibility of actually hurting the Devourers. The key was something she was calling reality anchoring, a way to make certain areas of space more solid and harder to erase. "Maya, you need to see this," called Dr. Foster's voice over the communication system. The xenorchaeologist was still aboard the Pioneer's Edge, but she had been sharing her discoveries with research teams across human space. "What is it, Amanda?" "I've found more records in the artifact. Maya, our ancestors didn't just fight the Devourers. They won because they learned to think like them. The ancient humans developed technology that worked by believing it would work, rather than following normal physical laws." Maya looked at her weapon design again. The principles it used were exactly the kind of impossible physics that Dr. Foster was describing. "Amanda, are you saying that human technology works differently from alien technology?" "I'm saying that when humans build something, they put a little bit of their stubbornness into it. Your reality anchors don't work because they follow scientific laws. They work because you believe they should work, and you refuse to accept that they won't. Maya felt a strange sensation, as if pieces of a puzzle were clicking into place in her mind. I need to test this theory. Can you send me more of those ancient technical specifications? Already transmitting. Maya, there's something else. I found records of what our ancestors became during the war. They called themselves Void Walkers. Humans who learned to exist partially outside normal reality, so the Devourers couldn't erase them completely. Before Maya could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Through the laboratory windows, she could see Devourer ships approaching. But instead of panic, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Computer, prepare to manufacture the reality anchor weapons, she ordered. Full production run. Engineer Johnson, the designs you've submitted violate several fundamental laws of physics. Manufacturing these devices should be impossible. Maya smiled grimly. Computer, I'm human. Impossible is what we do. On the surface of New Geneva, Colonel Baker watched as the first reality anchor weapons were deployed. Maya's devices looked like nothing more than metal boxes with strange geometric patterns carved into their surfaces. But when they activated, the effect was immediate. The space around each anchor became solid in a way that was hard to describe. The Devourer ships could no longer simply erase human positions within the anchor fields. Their reality-bending attacks bounced off like light reflecting from a mirror. All units advance, Colonel Baker ordered. Let's see how these things like. A fair fight. The human soldiers moved forward with their new weapons, and for the first time since the war began, the Devourers started retreating. But victory came at a cost that was becoming clear across the galaxy. Dr. Foster made the discovery while analyzing communications from the fleeing refugee ships. Commander Williams, we have a problem. A big one. Bigger than reality-eating monsters? The refugee species aren't just losing their worlds. They're losing their ability to remember their own cultures. Only humans seem able to maintain clear memories of what the Devourers have erased. Commander Williams felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. What are you saying, Doctor? I'm saying that we're becoming the only species in the galaxy with complete historical records. The Hive collective refugees can't remember half of their own technology. The Resonance survivors have forgotten most of their music. The Veilter refugees are losing their language. But we remember everything? Everything. Every species, every world, every person that the Devourers have erased. It's all still in human databases and human memories. We're becoming the keepers of galactic history. Commander Williams was quiet for a long moment. Doctor, are we turning into something other than human? I don't think we're turning into anything, Commander. I think we're remembering what we always were. The texts describe our ancestors as the memory keepers, the ones who held on to the truth even when reality itself was rewritten. Across human space, the pattern was becoming clear. Human colonies were not just surviving the Devourer attacks. They were becoming safe havens for refugee populations from dozens of species. Every human world was filling up with aliens who had lost their homes, their cultures, and sometimes even their memories of who they used to be. Ambassador Lisa Martinez stood in the emergency session of what remained of the Galactic Council. Only a dozen species were still represented, and most of those were present only because they had managed to reach human space before their homeworlds were erased. Honored delegates, she said, though the title felt strange when addressing the traumatized survivors of galactic civilization. Humanity offers sanctuary to all refugee populations. Our worlds will provide shelter, food, and protection against further attacks. Chancellor Valfara, one of the few surviving Valter leaders, looked at her with eyes that held barely contained terror. Ambassador Martinez, our people are forgetting who we are. Each day, more of our culture slips away from our memories. Soon we will remember nothing of our homeworld or our traditions. Then we will remember for you, Ambassador Martinez replied. Humanity has always been good at remembering things that others forget. We will keep your stories alive until you can remember them again. As she spoke, Ambassador Martinez realized that the balance of galactic power had shifted completely. The species that had been treated as junior members and curiosities were now the protectors of everyone else. Humanity had gone from being the newest members of galactic civilization to being its only hope for survival. But the cost was becoming clear. Each day, more humans showed signs of changing. They remembered things they had never learned. They understood technology that should have been impossible. They spoke with certainty about futures that had not yet happened. Admiral Kate Rodriguez stood in the war room aboard the command ship Guardian, studying the holographic map that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas where the Devourers had complete control. Yellow zones showed contested, space where battles were still raging. Green zones indicated safe areas under human protection. The map was mostly red. Admiral, we have incoming reports from the Outer Rim, announced Captain Tony Williams, her tactical officer. The Devourers have established a major staging area in the Kepler sector. Intelligence estimates they're massing for an assault on the core worlds. Admiral Rodriguez nodded grimly. The core worlds house the remnants of galactic civilization. Billions of refugees from dozens of species who had fled to human space for protection. If the Devourers took the core worlds, it would be the end of organized resistance. What's our response time to Kepler? She asked. 18 hours with the fleet at maximum speed. Too long. By the time we get there, they'll have erased half. The sector. Admiral Rodriguez turned to the communication station. Get me all fleet commanders. We're changing tactics. Within minutes, holographic images of human fleet commanders appeared around the war room table. These men and women had been fighting the Devourers for months now, and all of them showed the strain of constant battle against an enemy that could rewrite reality. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Rodriguez began, conventional fleet tactics aren't working. The Devourers can simply erase our ships faster than we can build them. We need to start thinking like humans instead of like a traditional military force. Commander Jake Williams appeared on one of the displays. His ship had been at the center of Devourer attacks for weeks, but somehow he kept finding ways to survive impossible odds. Admiral, what do you mean by thinking like humans? I mean, we stopped trying to fight this war by the rules. The Devourers expect us to behave like every other species they've fought. They expect us to retreat when we're outnumbered, to surrender when defeat is logical, to accept erasure when they rewrite reality around us. Admiral Rodriguez activated a new tactical display. But we're humans. We don't retreat when we're outnumbered. We get stubborn. We don't surrender when defeat is logical. We get creative. And we definitely don't accept being erased from existence. Captain Sarah Davis from the destroyer Relentless spoke up. Admiral, are you suggesting we abandon standard military doctrine? I'm suggesting we create a new doctrine, a human doctrine. One based on the fact that we're the only species in the galaxy that can remember what the Devourers erase. Lieutenant Chris Murphy had been leading the same squad for 6 months, but half the men under his command no longer existed in any official records. They had been erased by Devourer attacks, but Lieutenant Murphy remembered every one of them. More importantly, he refused to accept that they were gone. Johnson, take point, he ordered as his squad moved through the ruins of what had once been a Hive Collective City. Private Betty Johnson moved ahead, even though, according to military records, she had never existed. She had been erased 3 weeks ago during a Devourer assault, but Lieutenant Murphy had simply refused to let her disappear from his squad. Somehow, his refusal to accept her erasure had allowed her to continue existing. Sir, I'm reading multiple. Devour signatures ahead, Johnson reported through her radio. Looks like a patrol unit. How many? 3 ships, but they're using that reality bending trick. They're here and not here at the same time. Lieutenant Murphy smiled grimly. His squad had developed new tactics for dealing with enemies that existed partially outside normal reality. The key was to stop thinking about what was possible and start thinking about what needed to happen. All right, people, you know the drill, he said into his radio. Remember, these things can only erase you if you let them. Johnson, Murphy, and Williams, you're taking the flanking positions that don't exist on any map. Rodriguez and Davis, you're providing covering fire from the building that was destroyed yesterday. His squad moved into positions that defied logic. And Geometry, occupying spaces that the Devourers had already erased from reality. The tactic worked because the squad simply refused to accept that these spaces were gone. When the Devourers detected the human patrol, they attempted their standard reality erasure attack. But instead of disappearing, Lieutenant Murphy's squad began attacking from positions that shouldn't exist, using weapons that worked on principles the Devourers couldn't understand. Within 10 minutes, all 3 Devourer ships had been destroyed by enemies that were supposedly fighting from places that weren't their dot. Engineer Maya Johnson stood in her laboratory, surrounded by devices that violated every law of physics she had learned in school. Her reality anchor technology had evolved far beyond her original designs, and she was beginning to understand why. Computer, analyze the effectiveness of Reality Anchor Mark 7, she said. Analysis complete. The device shows 100% effectiveness against reality manipulation, despite containing no components that should enable such protection. Maya laughed softly. She had stopped trying to understand how her inventions worked according to normal science. It worked because she believed they would work, and because she refused to accept that they wouldn't. Maya, we need more of the Mark 7 anchors for the Kepler defense, said Dr. Foster through the communication system. How many can you produce? As many as we need, Maya replied. A manufacturing process doesn't depend on available materials anymore. It depends on how many we believe we can make. That's impossible. Amanda, I'm an engineer. 6 months ago, I would have agreed with you, but I've learned something important. Human engineering isn't about working within the laws of physics. It's about convincing the universe that our version of physics is better. Maya activated her production systems, and across the station, manufacturing units began creating reality, anchors using materials that existed because the human workers believed they should exist. Sergeant Nina Wells led her strike team through what used to be Devourer-controlled space. Their mission was reconnaissance, but they had discovered something far more important than enemy positions. They had found the source of the Devourer fleet. Command, this is Strike Team Alpha, she reported into her long-range communicator. We've found what we were looking for. It's big. The structure that floated in space before them was larger than most moons. Its surface was covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change when observed directly, and ships were constantly entering and leaving through openings that appeared and disappeared without warning. Can you give us an estimate of enemy strength? Came the reply from Admiral Rodriguez. That's the problem, Mime. I don't think enemy strength applies here. This thing exists in multiple dimensions at the same time. I'm reading energy signatures that suggest it contains millions of ships, but they're all occupying the same space. Sergeant Wells studied the massive structure through her binoculars. Command, I think this is how they've been appearing everywhere at once. This isn't just a base. It's some kind of dimensional anchor that lets them exist in multiple realities simultaneously. Can it be destroyed? Sergeant Wells looked at the readings on her scanner. By all logical analysis, attacking the structure would be suicide. It was defended by enemies that could erase attacking forces from existence, protected by weapons that violated every known law of physics, and existed partially outside normal spacetime. Ma'am, according to my readings, destroying this thing should be impossible. Sergeant, you're human. Impossible is what we do. Sergeant Wells smiled. Understood, Command. Strike Team Alpha is moving to attack positions. As her team prepared for an assault that should have been hopeless, Sergeant Wells realized that something fundamental had changed about humanity during this war. They were no longer fighting like a normal military force. They were fighting like the legendary warriors their ancestors had been. They were fighting like humans who remembered what it meant to refuse defeat, even when defeat was written into the laws of reality itself. Admiral Rodriguez received the strike team's reconnaissance report and immediately began planning the impossible. Her fleet was outnumbered 1,000 to 1 by enemies that could erase ships from existence. The target was protected by technology that functioned outside normal physics. Any reasonable military commander would retreat and look for a better opportunity. But Admiral Rodriguez was human, and humans had stopped being reasonable the moment the Devourers returned. All ships, prepare for assault on the enemy staging area, she announced to her fleet. Standard tactics are suspended. We're going in hard and fast, and we're not stopping until that thing is destroyed, or we are. Admiral, called Captain Williams, our weapons can't penetrate dimensional barriers. How do we attack something that exists in multiple realities? Admiral Rodriguez looked at the tactical display showing her small fleet against the massive Devourer structure. Captain, we're going to do what humans do best. We're going to refuse to accept that it can't be done, and we're going to keep trying until the universe gets tired of arguing with us. Captain Danny Rodriguez felt his ship shake as they approached the massive Devourer structure that Sergeant Wells had discovered. The ossuary, as the ancient texts called it, was larger than anything humanity had ever seen. Ships from his sister Kate's fleet were already engaging the outer defenses, but Danny had a different mission. Captain, we're receiving strange readings from the structure's core, reported Lieutenant Carol Smith from the science station. It's not just a base. There's something imprisoned inside it. Danny studied the energy patterns on his screen. The readings showed massive amounts of power being used not for weapons or shields, but for containment. Imprisoned? What could the Devourers need to keep locked up? Sir, based on these patterns, I think the Devourers aren't the prisoners. I think they're the prison guards. Before Danny could respond, his communication system activated with a message from Dr. Foster aboard the Pioneer's Edge. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and terror. That made everyone on the bridge stop what they were doing. All ships, this is Dr. Foster. I've completed my translation of the core texts from the artifact. The ossuary isn't a Devourer base. It's a prison that's been slowly failing for millions of years. The Devourers we've been fighting aren't invaders. They're escapees. Danny felt his blood turn cold. Doctor, are you saying there's something worse than the Devourers locked up in there? Much worse, Captain. The texts describe beings called the Void Eaters. They don't just erase things from reality like the Devourers do. They consume the very concept of existence itself. They eat possibilities, dreams, and potential futures. Lieutenant. Smith looked up from her station with wide eyes. Captain, if something like that got loose ... It would be the end of everything, Danny finished. Not just our galaxy, but every possible galaxy that could ever exist. Dr. Foster's voice continued. Through the communication system. Captain Rodriguez, there's more. The prison was built by our ancestors, the original Void Walkers. They didn't just defeat the Devourers and Void Eaters. They became something capable of containing them. But the prison is failing, and that's why the Devourers have been escaping. Danny. looked at the massive structure on his screen and realized that everything they thought they knew about the war was wrong. "Doctor, how do we stop it from failing?" "That's the problem, Captain. According to these texts, the only way to reinforce the prison is for humans to complete the transformation into void walkers. But once that happens, we won't be human anymore. We'll become something else entirely." Commander Jake Williams was leading the assault on the ossuary's outer defenses when he started to change. It began as a strange tingling sensation, as if parts of his body were becoming less solid. When he looked at his hands, he could see through them to the control panel beneath. "Commander, your bio readings are fluctuating," called Ensign Tom Davis from the medical station. "Sir, you're showing signs of dimensional phasing." Commander Williams felt a strange calm settle over him as he realized what was happening. "Ensign, I think I'm becoming what our ancestors were, a void walker." As the transformation progressed, Commander Williams found that he could see things that had been invisible before. The space around the ossuary was filled with cracks in reality itself, places where the prison's walls were failing. Through those cracks, he could see something that made his mind recoil in horror. The Void Eaters were vast beyond comprehension, beings that existed in the spaces between thoughts and dreams. They were hunger given form, emptiness that sought to consume everything that was or could ever be. Even looking at them through the dimensional cracks was enough to make Commander Williams understand why his ancestors had sacrificed their humanity. To keep these things locked away. "All ships, this is Commander Williams," he announced to the fleet. "I can see the prison structure now. The Devourers have been trying to break their masters out of containment. If they succeed, existence itself ends." Admiral Kate Rodriguez received her brother's report from the command ship Guardian and immediately understood the choice they were facing. Save humanity and lose the universe, or sacrifice their humanity to save everything that existed. "All ships, prepare for dimensional assault," she ordered. "We're going into the ossuary itself." "Admiral, our ships can't survive in dimensional space," protested Captain Williams. "They can if we stop thinking of them as normal ships," Admiral Rodriguez replied. She closed her eyes and felt the same transformation beginning in herself that her brother Gani was experiencing. "We're not just humans anymore. We're becoming something that can exist between realities." As she spoke, the human fleet began to change. As ships became translucent, existing partially in normal space and partially in the dimensional realm where the Void Walkers operated. It should have been impossible, but the crews simply refused to accept that impossibility applied to them, not Doctor. Amanda Foster felt the transformation taking hold as she worked frantically to translate the final sections of the ancient texts. Her hands were becoming translucent like the others, but her mind was becoming something far more than human. She could understand concepts that would have been incomprehensible to her original self. "Commander Williams, I've found the control mechanism for the prison," she announced. "But operating it requires multiple Void Walkers working in perfect coordination. They have to exist in 17 different dimensional states simultaneously. How many people do we need?" Commander Williams asked. "Based on the power requirements, at least 10,000 humans will have to complete the full transformation. They'll become permanent guardians of the prison, existing between realities to make sure nothing ever escapes again." Dr. Foster paused as she realized the full implications of what she was saying. "Commander, they won't be able to come back. Once someone becomes a full Void Walker, they can never return to normal space or normal humanity. They'll be protecting the universe forever, but they'll never be able to see it again." Engineer Maya Johnson was the first to volunteer. "I'll do it," she announced from her station aboard Unity. "My reality anchor technology was just the beginning. I can feel what I'm supposed to become." "Maya, you don't understand," Dr. Foster said, You'll be giving up everything that makes you human. No, Amanda. I'll be becoming everything that humans were always meant to be. Across the human fleet, thousands of volunteers stepped forward. Soldiers who had been fighting impossible odds for months. Engineers who had been building impossible devices. Scientists who had been understanding impossible concepts. They all felt the call to become something more than human. Sergeant Nina Wells led her strike team into the heart of the ossuary, their bodies now flickering between dimensions. Inside the massive structure, they could see the true scope of the prison. Vast chambers filled with swirling darkness, each one containing beings that could unmake reality itself. "Command, we've reached the control center," she reported. "But there's something else here. The original Void Walkers are still here, still maintaining the prison after millions of years. The original Guardians were barely recognizable as having once been human. They existed as patterns of light and thought, consciousnesses that had transcended physical form entirely. When they communicated, it was through direct transfer of concepts rather than words. New Guardians come," they conveyed to Sergeant Wells. "The cycle continues. The prison must not fail." "How long have you been here?" Sergeant Wells asked. "Time has no meaning between realities. We have been here since the first imprisonment. We will be here until the last star dies and beyond." Sergeant Wells felt the weight of what she was choosing. To save the universe, she and thousands of other humans would have to give up their lives, their humanity, and their connection to the physical world. They would become eternal guardians, existing outside of time and space to protect everything that was real. "Will we remember who we were?" she asked. "You will remember everything. That is the burden and the gift of the void. Walkers. You will remember every human who ever lived, every dream that was ever dreamed, every possibility that could ever exist. You will carry the memory of humanity even as you transcend it." Admiral Rodriguez made the final announcement to the human fleet. "All volunteers, prepare for dimensional transition. We're going to do what our ancestors did millions of years ago. We're going to save the universe by becoming its guardians." As 10,000 humans began the transformation into Void Walkers, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. The prison walls began to strengthen, the dimensional cracks started to seal, and the escaping devourers found themselves being pulled back into containment. Captain Danny Rodriguez felt his physical form dissolving as he became something that existed between thoughts and dreams. His last human sensation was a feeling of completion, as if he had finally become what he was always meant to be. The transformation was irreversible, and there would be no going back. But as the new Void Walkers took their positions around the strengthened prison, they knew they had made the right choice. The universe would continue to exist, and humanity's sacrifice would ensure that life could flourish across the galaxies. They had become legends themselves, protectors existing beyond reality to guard against the things that would consume all existence. The myths had come full circle. 3 months after the transformation, Ambassador Lisa Martinez stood in the rebuilt Galactic Council chambers on Earth. The room looked similar to the one on Nexus Prime, but everything had changed. Where once humans had sat in the smallest section as junior members, now the other species gathered around them, seeking guidance and protection. The Veilter delegate, Chancellor Valthara, spoke first. "Ambassador Martinez, our people continue to forget more of our culture each day. We need human help to remember who we are. The same problem affects all of us," sang Crystal Song Harmonic 9 from the Resonance delegation. "Only human databases contain complete records of our histories now." Ambassador Martinez nodded sadly. It was the same story from every surviving species. The Devourer attacks had not just destroyed their worlds. They had damaged the survivors' ability to maintain their own memories and cultures. Only humans seemed immune to this effect. The human government will continue to provide cultural preservation services to all species, she announced. We have established memory banks on 50 worlds where your histories, languages, and traditions will be safely stored. What she didn't mention was the price humanity was paying for this service. Every day, more humans showed signs of the change. They remembered things they had never learned. They understood languages they had never studied. They carried the cultural memories of dozens of species, becoming living libraries of galactic civilization. Captain Rick Thompson walked through the streets of New Geneva, which had been rebuilt after the Devourer attacks. The city looked normal enough, but Rick could see things that others couldn't. Shimmering figures moved through the streets, translucent beings that existed partially in this reality and partially somewhere else. The Void Walkers were everywhere now, invisible to most people, but clearly visible to humans who had been exposed to dimensional energy during the war. They moved through the world like ghosts, watching and protecting without being seen. Captain Thompson, came a voice that seemed to speak directly into his mind. He turned and saw a familiar figure, though it took him a moment to recognize her. Maya Johnson? He asked, though he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or just thought the words. The translucent figure that had once been Engineer Maya Johnson smiled. Hello, Rick. I wanted to thank you for your service during the war. Maya, what's it like, being a Void Walker? Different. I exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously now. I can see every possible future, every potential past. I can watch over humanity and all the other species at the same time. She paused. But I also remember what it was like to be human. I remember the taste of coffee and the feeling of sunlight on my skin. Captain Thompson felt a chill. Do you miss it, being human? Every moment. But I also see what we prevented. Rick, if we hadn't made this choice, there would be nothing left. No humans, no aliens, no stars, no possibilities. Just empty void. Where reality used to be, Maya's form began to fade. I have to go. There are cracks in reality forming near the Centauri system. The prison is stable, but it requires constant maintenance. After she disappeared, Captain Thompson stood alone on the street, wondering if he was looking at humanity's future. Would all humans eventually become Void Walkers, transcending physical existence to become eternal guardians? Dr. Amanda Foster worked in her laboratory on Earth, but her research had changed completely. Instead of studying ancient civilizations, she was now documenting living ones. Every day, refugees from across the galaxy came to her facility to have their memories recorded and preserved. Today's subject was an elderly Hive Collective survivor named Worker Cast 93. The insectoid alien sat across from Dr. Foster, struggling to remember details about his homeworld's culture. The breeding songs, he clicked through his translator. We had special songs for the larval stages, but I can only remember fragments. Doctor, Foster activated her recording equipment. Tell me what you remember. Even fragments are better than nothing. As Workercast 93 began to hum broken melodies, Dr. Foster felt something strange happening. The songs became clearer in her mind, as if she was remembering them herself. Complete verses filled in the gaps that the alien couldn't recall. Workercast 93, she said softly. Try this version. She hummed the complete song, every note perfect. The alien's eyes widened in amazement. That is exactly right. But how do you know our breeding songs? Dr. Foster didn't have an answer. She was changing, like all humans were changing. They were becoming repositories of galactic memory, living libraries that could preserve and recall the cultures of dozens of species. Commander Jake Williams materialized in the space between realities, his consciousness existing as pure thought and memory. Around him, 9,999 other Void Walkers maintained their eternal watch over the strengthened prison. He could see everything now. Every human colony, every alien refugee camp, every star system in the galaxy. He watched his sister Kate commanding the human fleet that now protected galactic shipping lanes. He observed his former crew members living their lives on worlds they had helped save. But mostly, he watched the prison. The Void Eaters were still there, still hungry, still pressing against the barriers that kept them contained. The original Void Walkers from millions of years ago worked alongside the new human Guardians, sharing knowledge of how to maintain the dimensional locks. New Guardian, communicated one of the Ancient Ones. You understand now why this duty cannot end. I understand, Jake replied. But will there always be humans to take our place when we fade? Humans are changing. Those who remain in physical reality grow stronger each day. They remember more, understand more, become more than they were. Eventually, some will choose to join us. The cycle will continue. Jake felt a measure of peace. At those words, humanity's sacrifice had meaning beyond just saving the universe. They had become the eternal guardians, ensuring that the cycle of protection would never break. Admiral Kate Rodriguez stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching, as her fleet escorted a convoy of refugee ships to their new homes in human space. The war was over, but the aftermath would last forever. Admiral, we're receiving a communication from the Void Walker Network, reported her communications officer. They're reporting all clear in our sector. Kate nodded. The invisible guardians were always watching, always protecting. Sometimes she caught glimpses of them, shimmering figures that looked familiar but were no longer entirely human. Admiral, called Captain Tony Williams. The convoy is asking about settlement rights on Kepler 442b. Should we approve their request? Approved. All refugee species have full settlement rights in human territory. Kate paused. Make sure they understand that human space is now safe space. As long as they're under our protection, nothing will harm them. It was a promise she could make with certainty. The Void Walkers would ensure it. 50 years later, Ambassador Lisa Martinez, now elderly and gray-haired, stood before a new generation of galactic representatives. Many of them were born after the war, raised in human space under human protection. Students, she said to the mixed group of young humans and aliens, you asked me what it was like when humanity was just another species in the galaxy. You asked what it was like before we became the Guardians. She looked out at faces representing a dozen different species, all of them learning in human schools, speaking human languages alongside their own, carrying human cultural values mixed with their ancestral traditions. The truth is, we were never just another species. We were always becoming what we are now. The war didn't change us. It revealed us. It showed us what we were always meant to be. A young veiled her student raised her translucent hand. Ambassador Martinez, will humans always be the Guardians? Lisa Martinez smiled. Not just humans, child, all of us. Humanity became the Guardians first, but every species under our protection is learning to share that responsibility. You're all becoming more human, just as we've become more than human. She gestured toward the window, where Earth's skyline stretched toward the stars. Look out there. Every world, every colony, every refugee camp is protected by the choice that 10,000 humans made 50 years ago. They gave up their lives so that life itself could continue. Do the Void Walkers ever regret their choice? Asked a young human student. I don't think they're capable of regret anymore. They've transcended such simple emotions. But sometimes, when I'm alone and very quiet, I can feel them watching. They remember us. They remember what it was like to be human. And I think they're proud of what we've all become together. As the class ended and the students filed out, Ambassador Martinez remained at the window, looking up at the stars. Somewhere among them, in the spaces between realities, 10,000 human souls stood eternal watch over the universe. They had been legends to most species until the myths started killing them. Now they had become myths themselves, living legends. That protected everything that existed. The galaxy was safe, and it would remain safe as long as there were humans willing to remember what it meant to refuse defeat, to hope when hope was illogical, and to sacrifice everything for the sake of others.